hello, everybody.
Hello.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about how to podcast.
Yes, and I wonder why.
It's so funny. Darryl was like, you want to talk about how to podcast on a podcast.
I'm like, how are people supposed to find the podcast if they're trying to look for a podcast?
So I, again, from being behind the chair, have been chatting with a bunch of people about our podcast. And then I went to a woman in business mixer the other night, and we got chatting about the podcast. Mm-hmm. And every time I talk about our podcast, someone says, oh, I don't even know how to listen to a podcast. How do I find you?
Which is not uncommon.
No, because podcasts are still fairly new to a lot of people. And
I think they started in 2006.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's not new, but it is relatively new. Don't quote me on that. I'm horrible at fucking statistics and
dates.
It's probably wrong.
You're
but
horrible at
dates. The end of the day, it's been going around for at least 5-10 years.
Yeah, so I wanted to do a podcast so that we could explain to people, I guess maybe like some of the benefits of listening to podcasts, how to podcasts, and then some of our suggestions on ones that people could check out.
So they want to know how to podcast as well?
Yeah. So,
okay.
So I've had a little bit of everything. Well, you've even had, like, one of our mutual friends had talked about maybe starting their own podcast. Mm-hmm. So I think just podcasting in general is what I want to talk about. So number one thing that we need to talk about is, how do you find us? Or
how do you find any podcast?
Any podcasts to listen to. Mm-hmm. You're the tech guy. Do you want to walk everybody through? And you got to dumb this down.
Well, it's actually quite simple. And I mean, whether you're an iPhone user, an Android user, whatever cell phone that you have, there are podcasting apps, Castbox, and there are Spotify. Some of the well-known name ones is obviously Apple Podcast and Spotify.
Right.
iHeartRadio is another one. TuneIn, Alexa. Google Podcasts. Like, there's so many different types that you can kind of venture into, depending on what type of platform that you have. So if you have an iPhone, Apple Podcasts is the best and at the forefront of all podcasts. So
right.
It's super easy.
That is a little purple icon
that
is automatically downloaded on your phone. It says podcasts.
Yeah.
If you deleted it, because I think you can delete that one.
Yeah, you can delete it.
I'm pretty sure Bria had said that she deleted it and then needed to put it back on. Just go into your app and then download the podcast app, and the same with Spotify.
Mm-hmm. So
you're gonna get your listening app, because that's the easiest way to do it over
you can
Googling.
But you can also do it like through like your Apple Watch. Like there's so many different variations, but you can also listen to it on your desktop and your laptop as well, right? Yep. Through Apple Podcasts.
Which I still
and
listen
iTunes.
to mine through iTunes.
Yep.
Even whenever I do Google new podcasts, I always tend to listen to them on Apple on iTunes. But so you're going to get set up with your app, your Google search, whatever, so that you can look for your podcast.
Some people are going to look at and ask, well, do I need an account, and so on and so forth. With Apple Podcasts, you do, because obviously it's attached to your
iTunes.
It's attached to your iTunes, but to a certain degree, because you can still listen to podcasts, it's just not going to allow you to save anything or download anything to a certain degree, I believe. I'm not 100% on that, but ultimately you can get Apple Podcasts and start searching. So, and I'm going to use Apple Podcasts a lot because that's pretty much the platform that I use and that I'm most familiar with. I also do a little bit on Spotify, but basically on the bottom of Apple Podcasts is the very, very bottom. There's your search, your home function, and then there's a browse. And in the browse, you're able to go in there and start kind of scrolling through a lot of the top shows, and that's all they display are the top shows. In terms of downloads, I believe. In my opinion, there are some that are not top shows. I think that it has a lot to do with marketing. So be very careful on what they consider to be top shows. Some of it's pretty fucking garbage, in my opinion. But
hey, people might think
We
that
Got
our
This
podcast
seems to be
garbage,
pretty fucking pretty skookum, but it's not on the top new and noteworthy. But I'm also full of shit. So you can browse multiple different categories, and you can kind of navigate your way through that and kind of get familiar. That takes some time to kind of navigate, but the most important thing that you can do is use the search function, and that little magnifying glass that you can use allows you to search anything in terms of keywords. If you're looking for, lifestyle, if you're looking for, marriage, or if you're looking for, murder mystery, you can search any type of topic, keyword that you'd like. And it's basically going to pull up anything that has it either in the title of the podcast itself, or in the title of the episode, or in the show notes that are provided within each episode. So, yeah, it's super, super easy to find it that way.
Right. And I think one of the important things, because my mom, of course, shout out to the non-techie, she was
Hey,
like,
Mar.
it won't let me listen because I have to download it and I can't download it. You don't have to download your podcast episodes to listen to them. You can stream them. So obviously, as long as you're either hooked up to Wi-Fi or you're going to stream off your data, you don't have to download your
It doesn't
episodes.
use a whole pile of data either.
Yeah, you don't have to download. So just keep that in mind, that you don't need to be bogging down your phone with a bunch of downloads. But one of the advantages to downloading is that if you are, say, going on
your trip,
if you're
on a trip,
you can download some of your favorite podcasts and do a few episodes so that you have something to listen to on a long drive. And there are podcasts out there that their episodes are like an hour to 2 hours long on average. And so those are always good ones. Like Bria just got hooked on a true crime podcast. And so with her being a teenager, it's something fun for her to listen to. But there's so many different types of podcasts that you can listen to. And I think just understanding how to find them is a big one. And I know for me, when I look for podcasts, a lot of the times I will search like top business podcasts, or I'll ask my group of friends, hey, does anybody have any new noteworthy podcasts that they're listening to? Because I find, because they're your friends, they're usually somewhat like-minded, that it's easier to find podcasts because there are so many out there that sometimes it just takes a while to find the ones that you like, which is kind of how we stumbled upon doing our podcast. I think we've already talked about this in a past episode about why we started to do this podcast, but they're all so different. So it's just a matter of finding ones that jive with you.
Yeah. So for me, when you find a podcast that you enjoyed, so there's a couple different ways to make sure that you either stay on top of it, or however you want to be able to follow it. There's a couple different ways that you can do it. You can continuously search for it and add it to something that you're constantly searching. But the simplest way is to subscribe.
Right.
And that subscribe allows you to put it in Apple Podcasts. It's the library. And your library, it's like your personal collection of podcasts and stuff that you have. And I'm pretty sure pretty much all platforms have the same relative four
you can subscribe
categories.
On...
No, I'm saying at the bottom of the app, it has like your search function, your browse for new things, and then you have a library or whatever, your dashboard, whatever it is. When you subscribe to that specific podcast, like the We Got This podcast, you can it pops up in your library, and anytime that there's a new episode, it automatically refreshes that, because sometimes when we release a podcast episode and I search like on my desktop, it doesn't actually come up with that new episode, because sometimes it takes 12, 14 hours for it to upload on the RSS feed. And that's something we can talk about in terms of how to do a podcast, and that's a whole different thing. But it'll on your phone, it automatically updates with the new episode, and you go ahead and listen to it. So like Chyanne was saying, you can download those episodes to your phone, and you can listen to it anytime without any type of Wi-Fi or data available to you. So if you're on a plane or you're in an airport and you're wanting to kind of listen to a bunch of stuff, and you can go ahead and binge to your heart's content. Yeah. It's super, super handy.
And I think something that is good for people to understand, that when they click that subscribe button, not only does it make it a heck of a lot easier for you to find your podcast, because I had one that I was listening to from a guy that was in Nashville, whose dad was like a singer. And if anybody knows this podcast, please tell me the name, because I can't find it. But he used to tell stories about growing up with all of these stars in Nashville and the stories and stuff. Yeah. And it was really cool to listen to him. And I had stumbled across him on my computer one day, and then I listened to him for like 3 days in a row, and somebody closed down my window and then I could never find them again. And I just haven't had time to search. And like
Should
I
have
said,
hit subscribe.
I know. And so I should have hit subscribe so that it was easy for me to find. But hitting subscribe also helps the people that put the podcasts on.
Yeah, there's a few things that allow the people that have the podcast to ensure they get noticed, not necessarily by Apple Podcasts and getting you on some of the lists and stuff, but more specifically to other people in terms of popular content. So when you search for something, it's going to pull up that popular content, and it's going to filter based on the type of listens and how popular that particularly episode or that podcast is. So when you subscribe to that, it adds to those subscribers, right? Or it adds to that algorithm. And the same thing that when you download or you play an episode, it also adds to that.
Right.
But one of the key factors is to what people don't know, and I mean they probably do know, but they're not conscious of the fact of it. It's no different than on Facebook or Instagram when you write a review on a company or a page. It gives them feedback
Right.
on their podcast. So if you have the opportunity, not just necessarily for the We Got This podcast, but for any podcast. I've written one for Spit and Chicklets. I've written one for the Joe Rogan podcast, and I mean you're just contributing to their success and also their failure, because ultimately, as much as we would love constant positive reviews, you also want something that's honest, right?
Yeah,
and
and I
something
think
that's going to reflect.
Constructive criticism can always go in a message. Like we've had a few viewers already write into us, especially on our earlier podcast, to say, like our mic system wasn't so good, which is why we are
Darryl,
now
you need
in
to
a
be a bit
closet
louder.
because our sound wasn't very good. So we've got better mics. We're in the closet and our audio is at least better. But that came because we had constructive criticism. And it's not like somebody just gave us a 1-star review. They wrote in and took the time. And I think...
Well, they didn't even actually write us a review. They literally just DM'd us.
I know, that's why I said they wrote in.
Yeah, they were like,
which
hey,
is great, because I think...
I like your podcast, but I can barely fucking hear you, Smitty. So get closer to the mic. Do your gig.
Podcasts are a lot of work. It's not like we're making money off of this. We're definitely like, this is a passion project.
Yes.
And I think it's really nice for people, whether it's our podcast or somebody else's, if you take 5 minutes and, either DM them with some constructive criticism or leave them a review. Just remember that, like those people are trying hard to give you content to listen to.
I almost think it's more important to write a review on a podcast than it is on any other Facebook page that's selling items.
Don't say that now. I like my reviews.
Well, no. What I'm saying to you is that it's almost more important as somebody, like, as we have the podcast rather than the business, but on a listener's perspective, when you're writing a review on a podcast, knowing that the We Got This podcast doesn't have sponsorship and everything that we're doing is out of pocket, whether it be the money that you're spending on the mics to the time that you're spending, recording and then publishing and then all of the subscriptions and stuff that come along with that.
Well, yeah, because you have to pay to use platforms. And I think that's maybe something we could go into, because we've had a few other people now that have messaged you asking about, hey, like, we were thinking about starting a podcast. How do we do that? And I think maybe we could quickly touch base on that.
I mean, if you're wanting to start a podcast, starting a podcast is something that you need to first find deep down if you actually have the time to do it and the commitment, because the key to podcasting is consistency. So releasing every week or releasing every month, like what type of schedule that you're wanting to do, I think that is a very important thing a place to start. Once you've established, your goals as a podcaster, the numbers, I used to be I used to pay a lot of attention to the numbers and how many listeners that you had and how many downloads and all these fucking algorithms. But realistically, for us, it's all about having a topic and having a conversation about what you are interested in and how you're going to affect the world.
Yeah, because our goal with this podcast was never to be like number one on iTunes or get sponsorship.
Of course it is.
Okay, your goal and my
that's the
goal
total
are two different
but
things.
for, like we had said before, if we could affect one listener.
We just want to help one
That's it.
person. We want them to not feel alone.
That's right.
That's our goal with this podcast. So yeah, I think when people are thinking
when
about
you're
starting
number
a
one,
podcast,
you're affecting more people.
well, yeah, but
So
figure out what you're going to talk about, and like you said, if you have time to do it, and then obviously if you're passionate about the topic that you're talking about, because you might only have one person listening to you.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more information, please check out our show notes, or you can find us on Instagram at the We Got This Podcast.
If you enjoyed listening to us and would like to show us some love, just screenshot today's podcast and share it to your Instagram, and don't forget to tag us.
And if you have any questions or comments, you can send us a DM on Instagram, and we will personally respond to you in no time.
One last thing, we would love it if you could find the time to rate us a review. Just head on over to iTunes or whatever podcasting app you love to use and share your thoughts.
Thanks again for listening.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.